Mark stood at the back of the wedding hall, his heart pounding violently in his chest. The air was filled with the sweet scent of fresh roses and the gentle hum of violins. It was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, a day of promises and new beginnings. But instead, he felt a crushing weight pressing down on him, his hands trembling as he clutched the evidence that had shattered his world. Just 2 days ago, Mark's best friend Lucas had appeared at his doorstep, his face pale and his hands shaking. Lucas hesitated before handing over Mark's phone, muttering, "You need to see this." On the screen were messages between Mark's fiancée, Emily, and someone named Nathan. The texts were explicit, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. For the next 48 hours, Mark had wandered in a haze, questioning everything. He desperately hoped it was some cruel misunderstanding, but the evidence was undeniable. He resolved to confront Emily after the wedding. Yet now, as he stood there watching her walk down the aisle, radiant smiles and glowing innocence masking her betrayal, he couldn't contain the storm of emotions within him. The ceremony began, and the officiant spoke of love, trust, and fidelity. Each word felt like a dagger twisting in Mark's heart. When it was time for the vows, Emily's voice rang out, sweet and steady, as she promised to love and cherish him forever. Then it was Mark's turn. He cleared his throat, and the room fell into a hushed silence. Instead of reciting the vows he had once rehearsed with so much hope, he pulled the phone from his pocket and fixed his gaze on Emily. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling but resolute, "I thought today would be the start of our forever. But how can I vow to be faithful when you couldn't even make it to our wedding without betraying me?" Gasps echoed through the crowd, rippling like a wave. Emily's face turned ashen, her confident facade crumbling. Mark stepped forward and handed the phone to her father, seated in the front row. "Take a look at what your daughter has been up to," he said, his voice now steady, cold, and unwavering. The room erupted into a cacophony of whispers and shocked murmurs. Emily stammered, struggling to form words as her betrayal lay bare before everyone. Mark tightened his jaw, his heart heavy but his resolve unbroken. He had loved her, trusted her. But now, all that remained was the painful truth he couldn't ignore. "This feels surreal," Mark muttered, his eyes fixed on the blur of trees passing outside the window. His voice was quiet, yet the weight of his emotions was palpable. Lucas glanced at him briefly, his hands steady on the wheel. "It's going to take time," he said gently. "But you did the right thing. You stood up for yourself, man. That's not easy." Mark sighed, leaning his head back against the seat. "It doesn't feel like the right thing. It feels like I just threw my whole life away." "You didn't throw anything away," Lucas countered firmly. "She's the one who ruined it. You just refused to live in the lies she created. There's a difference." Mark closed his eyes, letting Lucas's words sink in. Deep down, he knew his friend was right, but the pain was still raw. The betrayal, the public humiliation, the image of Emily standing there in her wedding dress, with tears streaming down her face. It was all too fresh. "Thanks for being there," Mark said after a pause, his voice quieter now. "For showing me the messages. For standing by me. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." Lucas chuckled softly. "That's what friends are for, right? Besides, I couldn't just stand by and let you marry someone who didn't deserve you." Mark nodded, though he still felt a pang of sorrow at the thought of what could have been. The life he had envisioned was gone now, replaced by an uncertain future. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe it was a chance to start fresh. They drove in silence for a while longer until Mark spoke again, his tone lighter this time. "So, what now? What do you do after walking out on your own wedding?" Lucas grinned. "Well, first, we grab some burgers because I'm starving. Then, I say we hit the road, no plans, no schedules. Just drive and figure things out along the way." Mark gave a small laugh. The first real laugh he'd managed all day. "That actually doesn't sound half bad." "Good," Lucas said with a satisfied nod. "Because I wasn't planning on dropping you off anywhere. You're stuck with me, buddy, For the first time since the ceremony, Mark felt a glimmer of something he hadn't expected: relief. He looked out the window again, the miles stretching ahead like a blank canvas. "All right," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Let's see where the road takes us." And with that, they drove on, leaving the heartbreak and betrayal behind. Chasing the promise of something new just over the horizon, Mark sat on the couch, his gaze fixed on the wedding invitation that lay on the coffee table. The elegant script spelling out Mark and Emily felt like a cruel joke now, mocking the dreams he had built around those two names. He picked it up, running his fingers over the embossed paper. For a moment, he considered tearing it apart, but instead, he set it down gently, almost reverently. With a deep breath, he leaned back and closed his eyes. The silence of his apartment was deafening, amplifying the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions swirling inside him. He replayed the events of the day: the confrontation, Emily's pleas, the look on her face, and finally, the moment he walked away. It all felt surreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "You know what hurts the most?" Mark had asked Lucas earlier in the car. The thought lingered now, sharper than ever. It wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the loss of what he had envisioned. The family dinners, the lazy Sundays, the laughter they were supposed to share. All of it had crumbled like a sandcastle swept away by a rising tide. He sighed, rubbing his temples as a fresh wave of exhaustion washed over him. Lucas had been right. Better to find out now than later, when the damage would have been far greater. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Mark's phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from Lucas. "Hey, just checking in. Remember, you're stronger than this. Call me if you need to." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Mark's lips. Lucas had always been there for him, a steady presence in his life. He replied with a quick, "Thanks, man. I'll be okay." The weight in his chest had dulled slightly since leaving the diner. The warmth of the food and Lucas's words had grounded him, even if just for a moment. He stood up and wandered into the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. As he sipped, he noticed the fridge door covered in photos. Most of them were of friends and family, but a few included Emily, her smile radiant, her arm wrapped around as Mark stared at those photos for a long time. He wasn't angry anymore, not in that fiery, immediate way he had been earlier. Now, it was a deep sadness, a mourning for what could have been. He took the photos down one by one, placing them face down on the counter. It wasn't out of spite. It was for himself, a step toward letting go. Back in the living room, he picked up the invitation one last time. This time, he folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. Maybe one day he'd throw it away, but not tonight. For now, it was a reminder, a painful one, yes, but also a symbol of resilience. He had faced the truth, confronted the lies, and walked away with his integrity intact. Mark sank back onto the couch, staring out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there was the future he deserved, one built on honesty and love, not deceit. It would take time, but he was willing to wait. For now, he let the quiet comfort of his apartment settle around him, a stark but welcome contrast to the chaos of the day. As his eyes grew heavy, a small, hopeful thought flickered in his mind. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning.